Hey guys, welcome back to the Stick Figure Historian. This is episode 2 of our England series. So in our last episode we talked about King Edward the Confessor and how he became king. So in this episode we're going to talk about what kind of happened when he was king. So once he became king, it wasn't like he just got to do whatever he wanted. There was mainly 2 earls that were controlling him. And so we have Godwin of Wessex, we remember from the last episode. And then we have this guy, Leofric. Okay, dude, get your act together. You're an 11th century earl, okay? Okay, that's better. Thank you. So we have Godwin and Leofric of Mercia. And they're the 2 biggest earls in England, and they bore a lot of influence on whatever Edward did. He had to get their approval first. And the influence went even further when Godwin got Edward to marry his daughter Edith. And Edward didn't really love Edith. He married her because he had to. But of course this gives Godwin a lot more say-so in what goes on in the kingdom. So one day, after Edward had been king for about 10 years, the Archbishop of Canterbury died. And the Archbishop of Canterbury was a very important position then. He was the head of the Catholic Church in England, so choosing a new one is a pretty big deal. So a council of the monks at Canterbury got together, and they chose a guy to be the next Archbishop, and it ended up being a relative of Earl Godwin. And Edward was not very excited about that. Instead, he suggested one of his Norman friends, Robert of Jumièges? I don't know if I'm saying that right, guys. My French pronunciation stinks, but we'll just call him Robert. He suggested that Robert should be an archbishop, so Robert gets appointed instead. And Robert did not really help the relationship between Godwin and Edward at all. He started whispering in Edward's ear, telling him that Godwin was actually secretly planning to kill him, just like he had killed Alfred years ago, Edward's younger brother. And we don't really know if Robert had any good reason to say this. It's possible he was just angry with Godwin because Godwin had actually taken some land that was technically supposed to belong to the church, and that was cutting in on Robert's money, so it may or may not have been true, but it really didn't help anything. Generally, the situation between Edward and Godwin was just not very good, and then the storm broke. So, Edward's brother-in-law, Count Eustace II of Boulogne, he's a Norman, came over from Normandy to England to visit Edward, and so Eustace and his guys stopped over at Dover on the way there, which is a little seaport town on the southern coast of England. And they were so rude to the people there that the Saxons just got fed up and they had a fight and they killed a bunch of the Norman guys. So Eustace goes and tells the king what happened. And instead of being angry with the Normans, which he should have been because they started it in the first place, Edward is mad at the Saxons instead, and he demands that Godwin go and punish them. And Godwin's like, yeah, whatever. And so you can imagine Edward wasn't very happy about that. So the nobles in England start choosing sides, who's going to fight for King Edward and who's going to fight for Godwin, and it looks like there's going to be a war. Until Godwin's adherents chicken out and leave him. So Godwin was forced to give up, and Edward sent him into exile with all his sons, and he even sent Edith to a convent, which, if you're wondering what a convent is, it's a place where lady Catholic priests called nuns go, and I mean, it's kind of like a nicer prison. It's not very nice. Anyway. So yeah, now Edward can just hang out and relax and have vacation, right? Well, for a little bit. Godwin is not the kind of guy to give up. So while he and his sons are in exile, they get together some armies, particularly in Flanders. We can see Flanders here on this map. The Flanders of back then was different from the modern one, but it's close enough. And in Ireland also. And about a year after they had been exiled, Godwin and his sons came back with these armies and demanded their earldom back. And Edward pretty much just gave up. He didn't want to have a war, so as part of the negotiations, Robert, the new Archbishop, was fired, and they appointed a guy they could both agree on named Stigand. Okay, this is ridiculous. I need to talk to whoever puts these slides together. Oh wait, that's me. Anyway, no, Stigand. Anyway, at this point, Edward's getting pretty old, and he basically just gives up and lets Godwin have his way. And he mostly devotes his time at this point in his life to hunting and building churches, particularly the most famous Westminster Abbey, which the Westminster Abbey of today, the famous church in London, isn't the same one that Edward built. The one that Edward built was actually demolished in 1245 so that they could build the new one, that's the one there today, over the top of it. So we don't really have a picture of what the old one looked like, but anyway. When Godwin dies, his son Harold succeeds him as Earl of Wessex, and Harold's 3 younger brothers end up becoming earls as well, and eventually they end up controlling everything in England except Mercia. So, other than a little bit of trouble in Scotland and then a rebellion in Wales, the kingdom was at relative peace for a while. Except Edward made a very foolish mistake in making a promise that he shouldn't have. And that is what we will talk about in the next video. So thank you guys for watching and stay tuned for episode 3.